Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Denver Broncos at the San Diego Chargers in their Week 13 matchup played December 6, 2015. We're going to go over every possession and go over the stats and give our breakdown and analysis of this AFC West battle between these division rivals. So the Broncos got the ball first, and they would drive down the field, and they would end up with a 3-yard touchdown pass by Brock Osweiler to Demaryius Thomas. And with the extra point by Brandon McManus, it was 7-0 Denver over San Diego. The Chargers would punt on their first possession after 7 plays, and then the Broncos would be held to a 3-and-out by the Chargers as they would punt the ball to San Diego. So now San Diego would take over with a little over 6 minutes still left in the first. They had the ball at midfield, and they would bring it into field goal range. But then they ended up losing some yards on a running play by Gordon, and that backed them up from the 24 back to the 30. And Lambeau would end up coming out to attempt a 48-yard field goal a couple plays later, and it was no good. So it remained 7-0. The Broncos would go 3-and-out on their second straight possession after having scored on their first possession, and they would end up punting the ball back to the Chargers. So the Chargers taking over, backed up against their own end zone on their own 9-yard line, and they would pick up a first down, but on 1st and 10 from the 24, Danny Trevathan intercepts Phillip Rivers and runs it back 25 yards for the pick six and the score. McManus added the extra point, and it was 14-0 Denver over San Diego, and that was just with seconds left in the first quarter. So the Chargers would end up bringing the first quarter to a close on the kickoff, and it would end up with it on the 24 as the second quarter started, but they would end up having to punt the ball. And so now the Broncos would take over on the 49-yard line, their own 49, with less than 13 minutes left before halftime. They would get down into San Diego territory into the red zone all the way down to the 5-yard line, but they weren't able to get into the end zone, and so Brandon McManus came out to attempt a 23-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and it was now 17-0 Denver over San Diego with a little less than 5.5 minutes left before halftime. The Chargers would start their next possession on their own 20 after the touchback on the kickoff, and then on a 2nd and 10 from the 30, Phillip Rivers was intercepted by Harris, and he ran it back for a pick six, the second defensive touchdown for the Broncos. But wait a minute, it gets called back due to a defensive holding call against Harris, so it was not a touchdown. Instead, the Chargers would remain with the ball. They would get into Denver territory, and Josh Lambeau would kick a 51-yard field goal with less than 2 minutes left before halftime to put the Chargers on the board with the score Denver 17, San Diego 3. So the Broncos would bring the clock down and bring this game to halftime with the ball as they were up near midfield as the clock would expire, and these two teams went to the locker room with the score 17-3. And little did San Diego know that last scoring drive would be their only scoring drive of the game. And on their first possession of the second half, they'd get into Denver territory, but then Melvin Gordon fumbled when Von Miller forced the fumble and recovered it. And now the Broncos would take over for the first time in the second half with the ball on the 42, their own 42, with a little over 12 minutes still left in the third. And they would end up with a missed field goal as they were not able to capitalize on the turnover. So the missed field goal, and it remains 17-3. San Diego would get the ball back, and then another fumble. This time it's Bush that forced the fumble by Floyd, and Stewart recovered. And so now Denver would take over on their own 26. And then Osweiler was intercepted by Verrett, and so they weren't able to turn that turnover into any more points again. And so now the Chargers would take over after the turnover by Denver. So they had the ball, but they would end up punting the ball back to the Broncos, and the Broncos would bring the third quarter to a close as neither team would score in the third, and Denver would open up the fourth, and they were backed up against their own end zone, but they came out of the end zone, they got down into San Diego territory, midfield just into San Diego territory, but they would end up punting the ball to the Chargers. The Chargers would punt after 4 plays. The Broncos would punt it back to San Diego. Now San Diego took over, down by 2 scores with just over 4 minutes left in this game, and they would end up turning the ball over on downs in their own territory. But the Broncos were not able to capitalize, and they would go 3 and out and punt it back to the Chargers with just over a minute left, and the Chargers would turn it over on downs for the second consecutive time. And then all that was left to do was for Osweiler to take a knee as the Broncos win in this low-scoring defensive battle, 17-3. We saw C.J. Anderson actually left the game earlier, as did Trevathan, as the Broncos got a little banged up, although they did get the win against their division rival. And Denver's now 10-2 on the season, 6-1 on the road. And San Diego now 2-5 on the road, 3-9 on the season. And the Broncos with the win, they're 3 games ahead of the Chiefs, with just 4 games left to play. And with the Patriots losing at the same time, as they both played late games, and the Patriots lost, and so the Broncos move up into the 2 spot, and the Bengals move up into the 1 spot. The Patriots move down into the 3 seed as of week 13. So the Broncos continue to win, and Osweiler now 3-0 as a starter. But they did it with defense. Of course, they had that pick 6, but they also held the Chargers out of the end zone, just allowing 3 points in this game. And Osweiler, 16 for 26, just 166 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Ronnie Hillman, 19 carries for 56 yards. C.J. Anderson had 7 carries for 42 yards before leaving the game. He also had 1 catch for 12 yards, giving him 54 total yards on the game. And Demaryius Thomas, 6 receptions for 61 yards and a touchdown, the only offensive touchdown in this game by Demaryius Thomas there early on. And then Vernon Davis also would leave due to injury as well. And for the Chargers, Phillip Rivers, 18 for 35, 202 passing yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. The rookie Melvin Gordon from Wisconsin, 12 carries for 55 yards. He also had 1 catch for 8 yards, which gave him 63 total yards on the day. And Antonio Gates, 6 receptions for 50 yards, was the Chargers' leading receiver, the future Hall of Fame tight end. But for the kickers, Brandon McManus, 1 for 2 on the field goals, 2 for 2 on the extra points. Lambo also 1 for 2 on the field goals, did not attempt an extra point. And for the defense, Von Miller, 2 sacks and a forced fumble. Bush also had a forced fumble. Barrett had a sack, and Ray had a sack. An interception for Danny Trevathan. Harris and Walker had forced fumbles as well, 4 forced fumbles for the Broncos. And for the Chargers, Ingram had a sack. Verrett had an interception. We look at the team stats, 19 first downs for Denver, 15 first downs for San Diego. And on third down, the Broncos, 6 for 13, 46% conversion rate. And for San Diego, 5 for 14, just 35% conversion rate on third down. They went for it twice on fourth down, their final 2 possessions, and both times they turned the ball over on downs. Total net yards, 293 for Denver, 272 for San Diego. And on the ground, the Broncos netted 134, the Chargers 93. And for the Broncos through the air, they netted 159, as Osweiler was sacked once for a loss of 7 yards. And for San Diego, they netted 179, 20 more yards through the air. Rivers sacked 4 times, losing 23 total yards. And for the penalties in this game, San Diego, they really shot themselves in the foot with the penalties. 8 penalties, 72 penalty yards. Just 3 penalties for the Broncos, 18 penalty yards. And the Chargers, 4 fumbles. They lost 2, recovered 2. The Broncos did not fumble the ball at all in this game. They did have the 1 turnover due to the interception by Verrett. We look at the red zone, 1 for 2 for Denver, 50%. And the Chargers did not reach the red zone, 0 for 0, 0%. And time of possession, 32 minutes, 57 seconds for the Broncos, 27 minutes and 3 seconds for the Chargers. So the Broncos going into San Diego, getting a win on the road, a low-scoring game. Not really the prettiest game, but they won it, and that's what matters. That's what counts at the end of the day. They got the W against a division rival. It's always tough when you're facing a division rival, regardless of their record. The Chargers usually play them pretty tough. Of course, they're pretty banged up. And Inman actually ended up leaving the game due to injury, too, as they have a very depleted receiving core there in San Diego. But that's, just one of the many problems for the Chargers. But the Broncos getting it done. Like I said, not a lot of offense. They only had the one offensive touchdown, but that's all they needed, especially when their defense holds the other team to just 3 points and puts up 7 on the board themselves. Of course, forcing those turnovers. And like I said, it wasn't the most fun game to watch unless you're a big fan of defense and punts. But the Broncos, though, getting it done. And they find a way to win. That's the story of the Broncos. It's been their defense that's been carrying them all season long, and they continue to do so here in Week 13. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and having a great weekend and enjoying all the sports.